Eunice grimaced at the bright light and reached to the bedside table for the phone. 4:30 in the morning. Half the bed was empty. Tate hadn't slept in again. She ran her hand over the cool sheets and sighed heavily. Her morning ritual had been honed over the years. Shower, light makeup, impeccably ironed white blouse, navy blue suit. Hair gathered in a strict bundle, not a single strand out of place. The mirror reflected a successful woman, owner of the Portland Brew coffee chain. No one would have guessed that 15 years ago she'd started with a rusty cart on the campus of the university. Back then, in 2010, all she had was an old coffee machine she'd bought on sale and a recipe for caramel syrup from her grandmother. Students lined up for her coffee, and she saved every dime. She opened her first real coffee shop 3 years later, a tiny space with a leaky roof and only 2 tables. Now she has 5 locations in upscale neighborhoods across the city. Her phone vibrated. A message from the manager of the main coffee shop. "Open. Everything is fine." Eunice smiled. She purposely recruited people like herself, hard-working, ambitious, in love with coffee. At 7 in the morning, the front door slammed. Tate was back. He smelled of whiskey, cigarettes, and other people's perfume, a sweet, suffocating odor. Eunice set a cup of espresso in front of him. How was corporate? Fine. He looked away, his fingers visibly trembling. Played until 3 in the morning. Then I had to help load the equipment. You've got lipstick on your collar. Tate jerked. The cup tipped over. Coffee spilled over the white tablecloth in a dark stain. Damn, must have been when they hugged goodbye. You know, musicians, bohemians. Of course. Eunice blotted the tablecloth with a napkin. Who booked the gig? Some construction company. Can't remember the name. He pushed the plate of untouched breakfast away irritably. Look, I'm tired. The interrogation in the morning is too much. I was just asking. You're always just asking. I'm sick of it. I'm a grown man. I have the right to... Eunice silently gathered the dishes. In 7 years of marriage, she had gotten used to his outbursts of anger, especially after his nightly performances. Once upon a time, he had actually played in a band, dreamed of the big stage. Now he occasionally moonlighted at weddings and corporate events, mostly sat at home, eating her money. On my way to the office, she buttoned her coat. Daisy's got the quarterly report ready, need to check it out. Tate mumbled something in response. Eunice noticed his fingers clenching the paper tighter than usual at the mention of the assistant's name. Portland was waking up the first passers-by on the streets, the smell of freshly baked goods from the bakery across the street. Eunice got into her silver Lexus and closed her eyes for a second. Something had subtly changed in their lives over the past few months. Tate was different, jittery, irritable. Or was it that she was starting to notice things she'd turned a blind eye to before? The phone vibrated again. A message from Daisy. Good morning. The papers are ready. I'll meet you at the office. Eunice started the car. A long day ahead, no time to think about her husband's oddities. Her work awaited her. Her true love was her life's work. She had no idea that this morning would start a story that would shatter everything she had believed in for the past 7 years. The Portland Brew office was located on the 2nd floor of a Victorian mansion. Eunice liked to work here in the early morning hours, when the silence was broken only by the measured hum of the coffee machine in the corner. She spread out on the desk the quarterly reports Daisy had prepared. Something scratched her attention the first time she looked at them. Eunice pulled out her calculator and ran the numbers again. Grain shipments from Colombian trade, minus 18,000. Last quarter, it was 12. Sales hadn't increased enough to justify such a difference. Daisy, she called out. The assistant appeared instantly, a slender blonde in a tight skirt and pink blouse. Too bright for an office worker, but Eunice didn't usually pay attention to such trifles. The important thing was that Daisy was an executive and grasped everything on the fly. Explain the discrepancies on Colombian trade. Oh, that. Daisy tapped a bright pink fingernail on the page. We switched to a new accounting system. Now the debits go at the time of order, not when the goods are received. Plus, the dollar exchange rate has gone up. Why wasn't I notified of the system change? I sent you an email. Maybe it went into spam. Eunice frowned. She never missed an important email. Okay, what about the deliveries from the Seattle roasters? Let me see. Daisy clicked her mouse, nervously fixing her hair. Red spots protruded on the back of her neck. At that moment, Tate walked into the office. He never showed up here before noon and was rarely interested in company business at all. Decided to drop in on my favorite workaholics. He tried to kiss his wife, but she ducked away with a nod to the papers. We're working. Oh, finances? He peered at the monitor over Daisy's shoulder. How's our income expenses coming in? The assistant twitched and hastily minimized the spreadsheet window. Eunice noticed them exchange quick glances. It's fine, she replied dryly. Since when have you been interested in this? Well, of course. I'm your husband after all. I should be aware of it. The phone in his pocket vibrated. Tate pulled it out, read the message, and visibly tensed. I'm going out for a smoke, he muttered and hurried out onto the balcony. Eunice escorted him out with a glance. He had quit smoking 2 years ago. At least that's what he'd said. So what's up with the Seattle roasters? She turned to Daisy. I need to check the archive data. Can I have a detailed report ready by tomorrow? By 3 o'clock. Daisy nodded and hurried out. Eunice leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. Something was happening in her perfectly fine-tuned system. Small cracks, barely noticeable inconsistencies. She opened a file of corporate card movements, several large cash withdrawals in the last month. Daisy attributed it to payments to small vendors who don't work with non-cash. But then, why no checks? Tate's muffled voice came from the balcony. Not now. I told you I'll call you back. Yes, I'll get the money. Don't freak out. Eunice pulled the old reports out of the safe. She had a long job ahead of her, to compare all the figures, to check every transaction. Her gut instinct, which had helped her so many times in business, screamed danger. The phone on the desk flashed a new message. Daisy. Sorry, not feeling well. Can I work from home today? Sure, Eunice dialed. Don't forget the report by 3. Tate returned from the balcony, disheveled with a running look. I should probably get going. Things to do. What business could you possibly have? Eunice asked the question aloud for the first time in their marriage. Are you following me? He snapped back. I don't have to account for every move. The front door slammed. Eunice looked out the window. Tate was crossing the parking lot with quick steps. A car was waiting for him at the exit. Behind the wheel sat a blonde woman who looked suspiciously like Daisy. Eunice blinked and rubbed her eyes. No, it was just imagination. Just fatigue and paranoia. She opened the first accounting file. Figures couldn't lie. You just had to know how to read them. The bank greeted Eunice with the chill of air conditioning and the muffled hum of voices. She usually arrived in the afternoon, but today she decided to stop by before her meeting with the suppliers. After a week of reviewing reports, she wanted to personally check the flow of funds through the accounts. The line for the teller stretched to several people. Eunice pulled out her phone, looking through her mail, when out of the corner of her eye she noticed a familiar figure at the ATMs in the far corner. Tate? At 9 in the morning at the bank? She took a step behind the pillar. Standing next to him was Daisy, in the same pink dress she'd been in the office yesterday. They were leaning over the ATM, bickering softly. Hurry up, Tate hissed. How much fiddling can you do? Don't push me. There's a limit of 1 transaction. Eunice watched as Daisy inserted the card, a corporate card with the Portland Brew logo on it. The assistant's fingers ran over the buttons and numbers appeared on the screen. 40,000. Her throat went dry. Eunice took a deep breath, feeling her heart pounding somewhere in her throat. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of working with Daisy. All that time. What are you doing? They jumped at the sound of her calm voice. The phone slipped out of Daisy's hands, hitting the floor with a thud. A message flashed on the screen. Take the money and… The rest was not visible. Eunice! Tate turned white enough to show the freckles normally invisible on his tanned face. What are you doing here? That's my question. She shifted her gaze to Daisy. Why are you taking money off the corporate card? We… The assistant licked her parched lips. Red blotches appeared on the back of her neck again. It's for the suppliers. That new farmer from Guatemala, remember? He only works with cash. What farmer? Juanito. Daisy looked helplessly at Tate. Juan Garcia, the latter picked up on it. Terrific coffee, baby. I tried samples myself. Daisy was just about to tell you. Eunice stared at them in silence. Lie piled on lie, clumsy and obvious. In another situation, she would have laughed. Right now, she wanted to scream. Okay. Her voice sounded surprisingly even. Show me the shipping papers and the receipts. They're in the office, Daisy muttered. I'll bring them over this afternoon. Sure, Eunice smiled. I'll expect you by 2, with the paperwork. She turned and walked toward the exit. A suppressed whisper could be heard behind her. What do we do now? Shut up. She might hear. In the car, Eunice sat for almost an hour staring at one point. 7 years. She built a business while her husband fucked her assistant and stole money. A classic of the genre. A dirty, corny story. The phone rang. Daisy. Eunice, I've got to go away, family emergency. I'll have the paperwork ready tomorrow. No need, she interrupted. You can take the day off, for a week. Thank you. You're so kind. Eunice clicked off. She opened the glove compartment, took out a spare pack of cigarettes. She had quit smoking 5 years ago. Her hands shook faintly as she flicked the lighter. The first puff burned her throat. Smoke floated in the morning air and a plan formed in her head. Clear, ruthless, like a business strategy. They wanted to play with her? Well, she'd show them how it was done. The recommendation came from an old university buddy, Randall Graves, a certified public accountant with 20 years' experience. The gray-haired, trim man in a perfectly pressed suit evoked instinctive confidence. Let's be honest, Mrs. Campbell, he said, settling into her office chair. Do you suspect financial fraud? I suspect I'm being ripped off, Eunice motioned him a file folder. Officially, you're here as a business process optimization consultant. Unofficially, I need a full audit for the last year. Every check, every payment. Graves worked methodically. Within a week, his desk was piled with papers and dozens of spreadsheets glowing on his monitor. He hardly ever left the office, subsisting on coffee and sandwiches. The scheme is pretty simple, he explained to Eunice in the evening when all the staff had dispersed. Your assistant was creating bogus orders for coffee deliveries, allegedly from small farmers from Latin America. Money was debited, but the goods never arrived. How much? In the last 6 months, $312,000. Probably more. I haven't checked all the paperwork yet. Eunice gripped the armrests of her chair. 300,000, almost the entire annual income of a single coffee shop. There's more. Graves pulled out a flash drive. The private investigator you hired sent the materials. The photos were crisp, professional. Tate and Daisy leaving the Blue Lagoon Motel, having lunch at Marco's, sitting in the Lucky Horseshoe Casino, Tate tossing chips on the table, Daisy hanging on his shoulder. Check out this casino. Eunice held out a photo to the detective. How much he gambled there. Already checked it out. About $50,000 in the last month, plus bills from jewelry stores. It looks like your husband's been gifting his friend quite a bit." Eunice stood up and walked to the window. Daisy's brand new BMW was parked in the parking lot. Now it was clear where the money for such a car had come from for an ordinary office assistant. "They were careless," Graves continued. "Too caught up in the success. Look, here's a restaurant bill for $5,000, a bottle of wine for $800, and here's a check from the boutique a $12,000 necklace. How long has this been going on?" According to the paperwork, about a year. Small amounts at first, then the appetite grew. Eunice remembered how Daisy had started changing her image a year ago. Expensive suits, designer bags. "Took out a loan," she explained. "Met a successful man," the co-workers whispered. "There's more phone records." Graves held out a new folder. "Be warned, there's a lot of personal stuff in there." Eunice opened the printout. "Baby, you're insanely beautiful. I can't wait for tonight." Eunice doesn't suspect anything. She's too busy with her coffee shops. "That's enough." She slammed the folder shut. "What about the taxes?" "They forged documents to cover up the fraud. That's already a criminal offense. Prepare a full report with all the evidence." When Graves had gone, Eunice took a bottle of whiskey out of the safe, poured 2 fingers, drank it in one gulp. The scene of her and Tate's first date stood before her eyes, the small bar, the live music, his smile. "You're special," he'd said. "I'll never betray you." The phone vibrated, a message from her husband. "Late for rehearsal. Don't wait up with dinner." Eunice grinned. "I wonder what motel tonight's rehearsal is at." She opened her laptop and started writing. A statement to the police, an application for divorce, a letter to a lawyer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, spewing out all the pain and rage of the last few days. It was getting dark outside. Lights were going out in the windows of neighboring offices. Eunice leaned back in her chair, looking out at Portland at night. Somewhere out there in that city, her husband and her assistant were celebrating another victory. They thought she was blind, stupid, absorbed in her work. Well, it was time to show them how wrong they were. Oregon has an equal property division law. Martha Ellison, head of the law firm Ellison and Associates, tapped her pen on the table. "In a divorce, your husband will be entitled to half of everything gained during the marriage, including the business." Eunice sat in a spacious conference room overlooking downtown Portland. 4 lawyers, top experts in family and corporate law, were gathered around the oval table. "Half of my business? The one I started before my marriage?" Unfortunately, the company's significant growth occurred after the wedding. The court might view that as a joint achievement. Eunice felt nauseous. Giving half of her life's work to the man who had betrayed her? A mockery of fate. "Any options?" She sipped water from her glass. "There are." James Hawkins, a corporate crime specialist, raised his voice. "If we can prove that your husband and his girlfriend were committing financial fraud, the court could deny the division of assets. Moreover, they will be criminally liable." "That would require hard evidence." Martha opened a leather folder. "So far, we have the auditor's report and photographs. That's not enough." "What if—" Eunice paused, choosing her words. "If documents with their signatures show up, contracts, payments, receipts, which don't actually exist." Hawkins lowered his voice. "It's theoretically possible, but document forgery is a serious offense." "No more serious than what they did to me." Eunice straightened in her chair. "What exactly do you need?" They spent the next 2 hours discussing details. Hawkins drew diagrams on the blackboard explaining what documents would create the necessary evidentiary base. "The first thing is contracts with fictitious suppliers. We need shell companies, preferably registered offshore." "I have connections in the Cayman Islands," Martha nodded. "We can set up 3 or 4 companies." "The second thing is documentation of kickbacks, receipts, payment orders, email correspondence." I know someone who can make perfect copies of signatures, Eunice said quietly. And a digital footprint specialist. Martha frowned. Do you understand the risks? I understand, but they have to pay for everything. By evening, the plan had taken shape. Eunice spread out on the table the documents the detective had collected. Receipts from restaurants, bills from stores, photographs. Evidence of their greed and stupidity. We're going to set up 3 offshore companies. Hawkins drove his finger over the diagram. Alleged suppliers of rare coffees. Contracts signed by Tate and Daisy. Invoices for large sums of money. Then there's the paperwork for cash kickbacks. What's next? Next, an anonymous tip to the IRS. An audit will uncover the fraud. By then, we'll have a complete package of documents, including surveillance footage of them cashing out. Eunice nodded. The plan was risky but elegant. All the evidence would point to Tate and Daisy. They would be trapped by their own greed. When do we start? We need time to prepare the paperwork. 2 weeks. Martha made a note in her notebook. One more thing. You must behave as usual. No hints, no changes in behavior. I'm a good actress, Eunice grinned. Learned it in 7 years of marriage. When the lawyers left, she stood at the window for a long time. The evening lights were turning on below, the city preparing for nightlife. She wondered what restaurant her husband and assistant were dining at now. What were they talking about? Making fun of her? Her phone vibrated, a message from Tate. I'll be late, important meeting. Of course, darling, she texted. Good luck. Eunice opened the safe and pulled out a folder of company documents. It was time to start her own game. She wasn't building this business to give it away to traders. The next morning, preparations began. A document forgery specialist worked in a small studio on the outskirts of town. He studied Tate and Daisy's signature samples for a long time before taking the job. A perfect match, he showed the first results. Even an expert wouldn't tell the difference. The IT specialist created a digital trail, emails, database entries, traces of bank transactions. Everything had to look flawless. The main thing is correct dating, he explained. Documents must appear gradually, creating a history of the machinations. Eunice supervised every step of the way. She had always been a perfectionist, a trait that had built her business and would now help protect it. A week later, Hawkins showed the first results. Look, here's the contract with Garrett and Coffee. Signatures, stamps, all the right stuff. And here's the kickback receipt, supposedly 30% of the contract amount in cash. Perfect. Eunice ran her finger along the lines. What's next? Now we need to create a history of the meetings, surveillance footage of them meeting with representatives of these companies. I have a better idea. Eunice pulled out her phone. Remember that restaurant where they have regular dinners? We'll use those meetings. The plan was fleshing out the details, turning into the perfect trap. Every document, every signature, every transaction, everything led to the inevitable finale. Are you prepared for the consequences? Martha asked at the last meeting. It's going to be a high-profile scandal. I'm ready, Eunice nodded. They chose this path for themselves. In the evening she came home early, cooked dinner, set the table. Tate showed up at 10 o'clock, smelling of Daisy's perfume. Honey, how was your day? Smiled Eunice. Fine, he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Tired. Get some rest, she set a plate in front of him. Big day tomorrow. He didn't know how important. Tomorrow began the game whose rules she had written, and it was a game they couldn't win. In the dim light of the monitor, Alex Brody's face seemed especially pale. The IT specialist worked in the basement of an old building on the outskirts of Portland, the perfect place for what they were up to. So we need to create a whole story? His fingers flew over the keyboard. Correspondence, documents, transactions. Exactly. Eunice placed a thumb drive on the table. Here are samples of their electronic signatures and scans of their handwriting. The story should start about a year ago, from when Daisy gained access to the financial documents. Alex opened the first file, a spreadsheet with dates and amounts. Clever, he muttered. Started small, then the amounts grew. Classic corporate fraud scheme. No one would suspect forgery. Eunice watched lines of code appear on the screen. Alex was creating digital footprints, invisible to the average user but obvious to auditors as metadata. Look, he expanded a new window. Here's the first email. Allegedly, Daisy's writing to your husband about a money-making opportunity. Hints, nothing concrete. Gradually, the correspondence becomes more explicit. A string of letters appeared on the screen. Daisy was proposing a scheme with bogus suppliers. Tate was agreeing, discussing the details. Everything seemed natural. The occasional typos, the colloquial turns of phrase typical of each. How do you know their writing style? From their actual correspondence, Eunice grumbled. The detective pulled the archive of their personal mail. They spent the next few hours creating a digital trail of the crime. Alex embedded the fake accounting files into Daisy's computer so that the timestamp would indicate the gradual creation of the documents. The key is synchronization, he explained. Each document has to appear at a logical time. For example, a contract with a vendor after supposedly meeting with the vendor, a payment after the contract is signed. What if they check IP addresses? Already thought of that, Alex opened a new tab. Look, some of the emails are supposedly sent from the office, some from home computers. All coincide with their normal work schedules. At 2 in the morning, the first part of the work was finished. Eunice looked through the documents she had created, contracts with fictitious suppliers, digitally signed by Tate and Daisy, payment orders for large sums of money, internal correspondence about the distribution of money. Now, traces in the banking system. Alex reached for another cup of coffee. We need to create a transaction history. Is that more complicated? Much. Bank defenses are more serious, but I have access to the internal system through a programmer I know. Eunice nodded silently. She didn't want to know the details. What mattered was the result. The next day, they met at the Portland Brew office. Daisy had taken the day off, a perfect opportunity to work on her computer. The files are embedded, Alex whispered, closing the laptop. Now we need to create a situation where she accidentally discovers them. Leave that to me, Eunice smiled. She had specifically scheduled an unscheduled records check for next week. Daisy would have to search the files in the archive and would come across compromising material. In the evening, Martha called. The paperwork is ready. 3 offshore companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Transaction history looks impeccable. How long until the first strike? A week. We need the IRS to get an anonymous tip and start an audit. Eunice went to the window. In the parking lot, Tate was helping Daisy into the car. They didn't even try to hide, so sure of their impunity. You know, she said quietly, it's funny. They were really running a money scam, just not as sophisticated as we'd accused them of. That's the beauty of the plan, Martha echoed. They won't be able to prove their innocence because they are guilty. For the next few days, Eunice played the part of the unsuspecting wife, smiling at Tate, discussing business plans with Daisy, and at night she worked with Alex, creating more and more evidence of their guilt. Final touch, he revealed on Friday. Look, search history on Daisy's computer, inquiries about offshore accounts, ways to cash out, fictitious suppliers, all allegedly within the last year. Perfect. Eunice looked at the list. And what's this? Messenger correspondence. Allegedly, they were discussing how to cover their tracks. It looks very convincing. Frightened messages, plans for what to do with the money. Eunice read a few sentences. Indeed, very much like the actual correspondence of frightened crooks. When will the denunciation show up at the IRS? Monday morning, an anonymous letter with a piece of evidence, enough to start an audit, but not all at once. Eunice nodded. The trap was slamming shut. All that was left was to wait. On Saturday, Tate announced he was on his way to rehearsal. Eunice saw him off with an affectionate smile. An hour later, the surveillance service sent a photo of him and Daisy at a beachside restaurant, celebrating something with champagne. "Have fun," Eunice whispered, looking at the pictures. "This is your last carefree weekend." A folder of documents lay on the table, the result of a week's work. Impeccable evidence, irrefutable proof, a story of betrayal and fraud that any investigator would believe. On Monday, the next act of the play began, and the protagonist had no idea that the roles had already been cast. At 8:45 on Monday, the Portland tax office received an anonymous letter, 12 pages of a detailed report on financial fraud at the Portland Brew coffee chain, money laundering schemes, fake invoices, bogus vendors. The letter was accompanied by scans of documents and account statements. Chief Inspector Roger Wilkins reviewed the materials and picked up the phone. "I need a team for an unscheduled inspection. It's urgent." Eunice greeted the tax collectors with impeccable courtesy. She led them into a conference room and ordered coffee to be served. She was calm. All the documents were prepared, every detail thought out. "We've received information about possible irregularities," Wilkins began. "An audit of the financial records for the last year is required." "Of course," Eunice feigned mild surprise. "Daisy, would you bring all the reports, please?" The assistant flinched. Fear flashed across her face, quickly, almost imperceptibly. She knew full well what the inspectors would find in those reports. "Maybe I'll do it myself," Eunice began, but Daisy had already slipped out of the office. An hour later, the nightmare began. Wilkins methodically compared documents, noting discrepancies. His assistants checked every transaction, every payment. "Mrs. Campbell," the inspector took off his glasses, "you seem to be in serious trouble. Fictitious suppliers, unreported income, tax evasion." "No way!" Eunice clutched at her heart. "I personally oversee all operations." "Not all." Wilkins unfolded the monitor. "Look, here are contracts with companies that don't exist, signed by your husband and assistant. Here are payment orders. Here's the correspondence about the distribution of the money." Daisy sat in the corner, white as chalk. Her hands shook as she tried to type a message, probably to Tate. "I need to make a call," she muttered and sprinted out into the hallway. Tate came rushing in 20 minutes later, anxious, crazy-eyed. He stormed into the conference room, but faltered when he saw the inspectors. "What's going on?" "Tax audit," Wilkins replied dryly. "We have some questions for you, Mr. Campbell, especially about those contracts with your signature on them." Eunice watched her husband. He was holding up well, denying everything, demanding a lawyer, indignant. But there was fear in his eyes. He knew they were really stealing money. He just didn't realize the trail they'd left. By evening, the first notices of fines arrived. $300,000 to Tate, $250 for Daisy, plus a demand to refund unpaid taxes. "There must be some mistake," cried Tate. "Eunice, tell them." "Sure, honey," she put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it all out. I'll get the best lawyers." Daisy sobbed in the restroom. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, mascara smeared across her cheeks. The perfect image of a successful businesswoman had crumbled in a single day. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "Where did these documents come from? I mean, we did everything clean." Eunice held out tissues to her. "Calm down. Maybe it really is some kind of mistake." That evening, when the inspectors had left, she locked herself in her office and called the bank. A few quick orders and all of Tate and Daisy's accounts were blocked. Corporate cards canceled. "It's for company security," she explained to the board of directors. while the investigation is ongoing. Eunice got home late. Tate was thrashing around the living room like a caged animal. "What are we going to do? They're demanding $500,000. I don't have that kind of money." "Neither do I," she lied. "All company assets are frozen for the duration of the audit." "Damn it." He clutched his head. "Should we sell something?" "Sure, except your car is on a lease and the house is registered to me." He froze, realizing the situation. No money, no assets, no way to borrow. A complete financial disaster. The phone was ringing off the hook with Daisy's calls. Tate dropped them, but she texted back, "What to do? They're going to seize the accounts. I can't pay my rent." Eunice watched her husband sipping wine. His face was gaunt with shadows under his eyes. He looked about 10 years older. "Will you help us?" he asked at last. "For the sake of our marriage." "Of course, sweetheart," she smiled. "I'll do my best." At night, lying in bed, Eunice replayed the day's events in her head. The fear in Daisy's eyes, Tate's panic, their helplessness in the face of the system she had set in motion. This was only the beginning. The next step was the criminal case. There was enough evidence the prosecutor had already received the files. The phone rang again. Daisy. Eunice dropped the call and turned off the sound. Let them suffer. Let them feel what she felt when she learned of their betrayal. Behind the wall, Tate was talking to someone in a whisper, probably looking for ways to get money. It was no use. She'd cut off all channels. No one would give them a loan. No one would help them. She closed her eyes, smiling. The first act of revenge completed perfectly. It would only get more interesting from here. After all, she wasn't just ruining their lives. She was teaching a lesson. Betrayal always had a price, and they would pay it in full. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Daisy sat in Marco's cafe, nervously twirling a cup of cold cappuccino in her hands. Customers chatted softly at neighboring tables, and a waitress wiped down the counter. An ordinary day except for one but. Her lawyer had called her yesterday and told her the amount of his fee. $20,000. Daisy dug her nails into her palm. Where am I going to get that kind of money? Tate was already 40 minutes late for the meeting. When he finally showed up, crumpled, red-eyed, she barely restrained herself from screaming. "Where have you been? I've been calling all night." "Hush," he spat in his chair. "My head is splitting. Tried to borrow money from Steve." "I? And what and? Rejected it, of course. Just like everyone else." Tate waved at the waitress. "Double espresso." "I need money for a lawyer," Daisy pitched forward. $20,000. Today." "I don't have that kind of money. You know that. Eunice has blocked all the accounts." "Sell the car." "It's on lease, you idiot." He set the cup down with a clatter. Several customers turned around. "And anyway, this is all your fault." "Me?" Daisy gasped in indignation. "Who came up with the bogus vendor scheme? Who forged the documents? And who kept them on the work computer? Who left traces everywhere like a schoolgirl?" They didn't notice as they started talking louder and louder. The barista behind the counter defiantly turned away, but it was obvious he could hear every word. "I risked everything," Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "For you. You promised that we'd be together, that we'd leave." "Shut up," Tate grabbed her arm. "You're going to ruin everything." "Ruin it?" she lashed out. "You know what? I'm going to go to Eunice's. I'll tell her everything, how you seduced me, how you talked me into helping you steal. Just try it." His voice became threatening. "I'll say you made it all up. I have proof." "What kind of proof?" "The correspondence, where you suggest a scheme with the suppliers. You don't think I kept it?" Daisy turned pale. She had indeed written those letters, the naive, enthusiastic messages of a lovesick fool willing to do anything for her married lover. "You wouldn't dare." "I dare," he leaned back in his chair. "You think I'm going to let you ruin my life?" "Your life?" She laughed hysterically. What about me? I have a mortgage, loans. I'm going to lose everything. Find another sponsor, Tate fiddled. You know how to charm men. The slap sounded like a gunshot. The patrons stared at them in unison, the waitress frozen with her tray. Bastard, Daisy whispered. You used me. And you didn't use me? He rubbed his cheek. You think I didn't see you making plans? Divorce your friend's rich husband, get half the business. Shut up, she jumped up, knocking over the cup. The coffee spread across the white tablecloth. You don't know anything. I know you slept with that supplier from Seattle and with the CFO. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Daisy grabbed her bag and ran out of the cafe. Tate remained seated, staring into the space in front of him. Check, please, he tossed to the waitress. Pulled out his wallet, but there was only change in there. Credit cards blocked, no cash. Sorry, he mumbled. Can I drop it off tomorrow? Of course, Mr. Campbell. The waitress pursed her lips. As usual. He walked out into the rain, feeling the judgmental looks on him. Tomorrow the whole town would be discussing this scene. Little Portland loves stories like this. Adultery, money, scandal in a decent establishment. The phone was ringing off the hook. Daisy, debt collectors, the IRS. He dropped them one by one. That evening Eunice called, Honey, where are you? I've made dinner. Running late. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Business. What business, dear? It's not like you don't have a job. It sounded so casual, so calm. But he sensed something behind his wife's words, something not good. Eunice, Come home, she interrupted. We need to discuss how to pay the fines. He wandered down the street, oblivious to the rain. Scraps of thoughts swirled in his head. The bills, Daisy's threats, his wife's cold voice. The phone rang again, the number of the tax office. Tate turned off the phone and went into the bar. In his pocket he found a crumpled 20, the last of his money, enough for a couple shots of whiskey. Double, he tossed to the bartender, and don't water it down. Somewhere across town, Daisy sat in her rented apartment looking at the late payment notices. Tomorrow the bank would come to foreclose. The day after tomorrow they'd evict her from her apartment. She pulled out her phone, found Eunice's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. Tell her everything? Confess? Beg for forgiveness? Tate's words about evidence came to mind. He'd be able to set her up, blame it on her. Daisy threw the phone away and burst into tears. She was trapped. No money, no support, no future. And in her perfect home, Eunice sat at the table looking at the cooling dinner. She knew about the scandal at the cafe. She'd already gotten calls from several well-wishers. Everything was going according to plan. The crack between the lovers was turning into a chasm. Soon they would hate each other, as much as they used to love each other. She smiled and poured herself some wine. Revenge was a dish that really should be served cold. The black sedan had shown up 3 days ago. It loomed from outside the house, then outside Tate's favorite bar, then outside the Portland Brew office. Tinted windows, unmemorable license plate. I'm being followed. Tate drummed his fingers nervously on the table. The third glass of whiskey of the evening brought no relief. But by who? The IRS? The police? He tried calling Daisy, but she hadn't picked up the phone in a week. Since the scandal at the cafe, she'd seemed to have disappeared. Never showed up for work, never returned messages. Eunice was acting strange. Too calm, too right. She made breakfast, inquired about his affairs, offered to help him with his lawyers. Not one reproach, not one leer. Something's not right here, Tate muttered, finishing his whiskey. Waiting until his wife left for the office, he began his search. Methodically, he checked every drawer, every folder in the home office. Nothing suspicious. Bills, receipts, the usual paperwork. Eunice's cell phone was on the nightstand, the first time she'd ever left it at home. Tate grabbed the smartphone with trembling hands. The screen demanded a password. Birthday? No. Wedding date? Also no. Date the first coffee shop opened? Bingo. The screen unlocked. Calls, messages, mail. Everything looked normal. Too normal. No suspicious contacts. No secret correspondence. Shit. He threw the phone on the bed. She's up to something. I know it. In the evening, Tate was already pretty drunk. Eunice was cooking dinner, humming some tune. Stop pretending, he stormed into the kitchen. I know it's you. What are you talking about, honey? She calmly stirred the sauce. The paperwork, the IRS, that damn audit. Tate, you're drunk. Eunice wiped her hands with a towel. Let's talk when you come to your senses. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed her pressing something on her phone. A voice recorder? You're recording me? He took a step toward her. Gathering dirt? I just want to protect myself. She didn't back down. You've gotten aggressive lately. I'm aggressive? Tate chuckled. And you are? You make yourself out to be the perfect wife, but you're… And yourself what? Her voice remained even. Talk. You're up to something. I don't know what, but I'm going to find out. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey and left for the living room. An hour later, the clinking of broken glass came from there. Eunice found him asleep in a chair. Shards of the bottle dotted the floor, an amber stain blurred on the carpet. Poor, poor Tate, she whispered, pulling out her phone. The recording of the scandal turned out great. It'll come in handy for the divorce proceedings. He woke up the next day with a hell of a headache. There was a note waiting on the kitchen table. Honey, I made you breakfast. We'll discuss the meeting with the lawyers tonight. Kisses, Eunice. Tate crumpled the note. That care, that perfection, it was all fake. But how to prove it? He drove to the Portland Brew office. He needed to talk to Daisy, but her desk was empty. Miss Ramsey has taken a leave of absence at her own expense, the receptionist reported. For a month. Where did she go? I don't know, Mr. Campbell. Why don't you ask your wife? He caught the secretary's mocking look. They knew everything, the affair, the embezzlement, the scandal at the cafe. The black sedan was still following him. Tate looped around the city trying to get away, but the car kept its distance. By late afternoon, he was drunk again, sitting at the bar staring at the bottom of an empty glass. Trouble, buddy? The bartender asked. My wife. She's up to something. I know. All wives are up to something, the bartender observed philosophically. Another whiskey? Double. Tate pulled out a crumpled bill. And you know what? I'm going to bring her out in the open. I'll find proof. The bartender only shook his head. He'd seen plenty like this. Broken, paranoid, drowning in alcohol. At home, Eunice listened to the tape of the evening scandal. Her husband's voice breaking into a scream, the clinking of broken glass. Perfect evidence of his unstable condition for the court. Look for it, honey, she whispered. Look for proof. You won't find anything. Waiting for Tate in the bedroom was a perfectly made bed and a note saying good night. Such a caring, such a loving wife. He crumpled the note and reached for the unfinished bottle. Paranoia gnawed at him from the inside, but he couldn't prove anything, and the black sedan was still on duty outside the house, patiently, relentlessly, as a reminder that the circle was narrowing. Daisy sat in front of the monitor, staring blankly at the screen. In the Archive 1700 folder, she found dozens of documents she didn't even know existed. Contracts with her signature, perfect, as if copied. Correspondence that never existed. Paychecks for huge sums of money. God, she whispered, we've been set up. Attempts to call Tate were futile. His phone was disconnected. The last week had turned him into a paranoid man drowning in alcohol. There was no trace of the charismatic man who had bewitched her a year ago. Daisy looked at her watch. It was almost midnight, but it was impossible to wait until morning. She grabbed her bag and ran out of the apartment. Eunice's house was located in an upscale Portland neighborhood, a Victorian mansion with a manicured garden. A light was on in the window of the second-floor study. Daisy stood in front of the door for a long time, gathering her courage. Finally, she pressed the bell button. "Who? Oh, it's you." Eunice appeared on the doorstep in a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. "What do you want at this hour?" "To talk." Daisy's voice trembled. "Please." Eunice stepped aside silently, letting her into the house. A fireplace burned in the study, papers piled on the desk. It looked like she'd been working late. "I figured it out." Daisy collapsed to her knees. "It was you, wasn't it? You set the whole thing up." "What do you mean?" Eunice sank into a chair, setting her glass on the table. "The documents! Those damn contracts, correspondence. They weren't there before, I swear." "Really?" An icy note appeared in Eunice's voice. "What was?" Daisy burst into tears, smearing mascara on her cheeks. "We did steal, but not that much. Tate came up with a scheme with fake suppliers. Said it was temporary, just to get back on our feet. Go on. He promised to divorce you, said he didn't love you, that you were obsessed with work." Daisy lifted a tear-stained face. "I believed it. Like a fool I believed it." "And how long did it last?" "A year, about. At first it was just meetings. He wooed beautifully, gave gifts. Then he started talking about money, saying, 'You don't notice the small spending anyway.'" Eunice stood up and went to the window. Rain drizzled behind the glass, turning the streetlights into blurry patches. "So, a year," she said thoughtfully. "And I didn't find out until a month ago. Funny." "I'm sorry." Daisy crawled to her on her knees. "I was such a fool. He manipulated me, used me." "Stand up." Eunice's voice became harsh. "It's pathetic." Daisy rose awkwardly, clinging to her chair. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her pantyhose ripped at the knees. "What happens now?" she whispered. "What do you want?" "Help me. I don't have money for a lawyer. The bank is foreclosing on the apartment. I'll tell the investigators everything, confirm that Tate orchestrated the scheme." "And put all the blame on him?" Eunice grinned. "How noble." "But it's true. He made the whole thing up. I was just helping steal money from my company, just sleeping with my husband, just betrayed my trust." Daisy cringed under her icy stare. "I can fix this," she muttered. "Get the money back. In time." "You know what the funny thing is?" Eunice walked back to her chair and picked up her glass. "I really appreciated you. Thought you were smart, promising, was going to make partner." "Really?" Daisy's eyes widened. "Yes, but you chose a different path." Eunice sipped her wine. "And now you're reaping the benefits. What am I supposed to do?" "I have no idea," she shrugged. "Maybe find another rich married man." Daisy flinched as if slapped. "I love him," she whispered. "You love him?" Eunice laughed. "He's been sleeping with the barmaid at the Blue Oyster. Has been for a month now." "What?" "Oh, yeah. And with the waitress at the Italian restaurant. Did you really think you were special?" Daisy staggered back, grabbing the wall. Everything was falling apart. Love, career, dreams of a rich life. "Get out," Eunice said calmly. "And don't even think about running. The IRS is watching all your movements." "You're a monster," Daisy exhaled. "No, honey, I'm a businesswoman, and you tried to steal my business." When the door slammed behind Daisy, Eunice stood at the window for a long time, watched her former assistant stumble down the street in her high heels. The phone vibrated, a message from the detective. "Subject is out, continuing surveillance." "Great," she texted. "Keep an eye on her." Eunice returned to the fireplace and tossed a log. The flames illuminated her face, and for a second it looked like she was smiling. One enemy broken. The second remained. The Silver Lily restaurant was their special place. It was where Tate had proposed to her 7 years ago, where they celebrated every wedding anniversary. Tonight, Eunice had specially reserved their favorite table by the window. "Good evening, Mrs. Campbell." The maitre d' respectfully pulled back a chair. "Your usual table." Eunice looked impeccable. A black cocktail dress, a string of pearls, discreet makeup. In contrast, Tate seemed wrinkled, despite the suit. His eyes were red from sleep deprivation and alcohol, his hands shaking faintly. "Why are we here?" He looked around nervously. "Missed our place," Eunice smiled. "Remember when you proposed to me? Hid the ring in the champagne glass." "I remember." He looked away. "Look, if this is an attempt to patch things up—" "Oh no, darling. This is a farewell dinner. Have you been following me?" "Of course. I'm a businesswoman, used to controlling my assets." "Assets?" He grinned bitterly. "Is that how you perceived me?" "How else? You lived on my money, slept with my assistant, stole from my company." "I loved you," his voice trailed off. "But you were only ever preoccupied with business. Daisy at least saw me as a man, not a sponsored husband." "Saw?" Eunice pulled out a new stack of photos. "What's this then? You with the bartender at the Blue Oyster. You with the waitress from the pasta bar. Looks like you've sought understanding from a lot of women." Tate grabbed his whiskey glass, spilling half of it onto the tablecloth. "What are you seeking?" "Justice." She placed the papers in front of him. "Here's the divorce petition, and proof of your financial shenanigans, both real and additional." "Additional? You didn't think I was going to let you get half the business in the divorce, did you? I had to make your guilt a little, amplify your guilt." "You set us up," he whispered. "Those documents, the tax audit." "Smart boy," Eunice smiled. "Too bad you didn't use your intelligence in legitimate business. I can explain it all. It was Daisy's idea. She manipulated me." "Not true," she shook her head. "Daisy has already confessed everything, sobbed in my office, begged for forgiveness, told me how you seduced her, promised to divorce her." "Bitch!" Tate jumped up. "I'm going to destroy her." "Sit down." Eunice's voice turned icy. "You're not going to destroy anyone, because the IRS will be all over you tomorrow." "You wouldn't dare." "I already have. A report has been filed, an investigation has been launched. By the way, your mistress has agreed to testify against you in exchange for a reduced sentence." Tate collapsed into a chair, wrapping his arms around his head. "Please," he whispered. "I'll make things right. I'll get the money back. I'll quit drinking." "Too late, honey." Eunice blotted her lips with a napkin. "For 7 years I've kept you, put up with your cheating, turned a blind eye to petty theft. But you've gone too far. I love you." He reached a trembling hand across the table. "No," she pulled away. "You love my money, and now you're going to lose it all." Something broke in his eyes. Tate jumped up, knocking over the table. Dishes clattered across the floor, wine spreading red stains across the white tablecloth. "You bitch!" he yelled. "You cold-blooded, calculating bitch!" Security appeared instantly. 2 stout men twisted Tate, who continued to shout curses. "Sorry to bother you." Eunice handed the maitre d' a credit card to the maitre d'. "Pay for the damages." She calmly gathered her paperwork, threw on her coat, and stepped out into the chilly evening. Behind her, she could still hear the screams of her husband being led out the back door by security. In the car, Eunice finally allowed herself to relax. Her hands trembled and tears came to her throat. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of illusions. The phone vibrated, a message from the lawyer. "The documents are ready. We're going to court tomorrow." "Great," she texted. "We're on track." At home, Eunice stood under the shower for a long time, washing away the evening. Then she pulled out a bottle of wine and an old photo album. Their wedding, their honeymoon, their first happy years. "Goodbye, love," she whispered, closing the album. Tomorrow a new life would begin, without betrayal, without lies, without compromise. In the meantime, you can allow yourself a little weakness. Just one night to mourn broken dreams. Grand larceny, tax evasion, forgery of documents. The tax police investigator monotonously read out the list of charges. Daisy sat across from him, crumpling a handkerchief in her hands. "It was all him," she sobbed. "Tate came up with the scheme, got me involved." In an adjoining office, Tate testified she was the financier. "Daisy did all the transactions. I just signed the papers without looking into it." Senior investigator Wilkins shook his head as he reviewed the documents. He'd seen a lot of financial scams in his 30 years of service, but this one was special. Too much personal, too much passion. "The Portland press is thrilled," he informed a colleague. "The love triangle, the embezzlement, the scandalous divorce, it's like a script for a TV show." The local paper, the Portland Daily, ran a screaming headline, "The Bitter Taste of Success, How a Love Affair Ruined a Coffee Empire." The front page featured a photo of Tate and Daisy leaving the restaurant. The divorce hearing began at 9 in the morning. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious townspeople, even a few of Eunice's competitors had come to watch her fall. "Your Honor," Tate's attorney waved papers, "my client has been married to Mrs. Campbell for 7 years. During that entire time, he helped develop the business." "Helped?" Martha Ellison rose from her seat. "Allow me to present documents on Mr. Campbell's embezzlement, restaurant bills, jewelry store receipts, casino statements." The judge scrutinized the papers. Tate sat with his head down, wrinkled, unshaven, in the same suit he'd worn 3 days ago. "And what's this?" The judge held up another document. "Miss Ramsey's testimony about financial fraud." "Lies!" Tate jumped up. "She made it up all by herself." "Quiet in the courtroom." The judge banged his gavel. "One more prank, Mr. Campbell, and you'll be taken out." Eunice sat up straight, staring in front of her. Impeccable suit, perfect hair, not a shadow of emotion on her face. Only the fingers clutching her purse gave away the tension. "Given the evidence presented," the judge coughed, "the court denies Mr. Campbell the division of business assets. The divorce is granted." There was a murmur in the hall. Tate shouted something. His attorney tried to protest. Eunice silently gathered up the papers and walked out. By late afternoon, the story was in the national news. The Business Channel interviewed an expert. A classic case of corporate fraud against the backdrop of a personal relationship. Young assistant seduces boss's husband. Together, they pull off a scam. Daisy watched this report in a rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her phone was ringing off the hook with calls from reporters. "Miss Ramsey, comment on the allegations. Is it true that you plan to take over the business? How much money have you managed to withdraw?" She turned off the phone and pulled out a bottle of wine. Career ruined, reputation destroyed. Even her parents refused to communicate after the media scandal. Tate sat at the bar, sipping whiskey. His picture flashed on the TV screen. The paparazzi had spotted him outside the courthouse. "Hey, buddy," the bartender nodded at the screen. "Isn't that you in there?" "Pour another," Tate muttered, "and turn the damn thing off." And in the Portland Brew office, Eunice was holding a meeting with the employees. "The company continues to operate," her voice sounded firm. "All commitments to the partners will be honored. The new financial control system will eliminate such incidents in the future." In the evening, she stayed up late reviewing reports. On the table lay fresh newspapers with headlines about the scandal. "We'll get through this," she whispered, stroking the company logo on the folder. "We'll start over." The phone rang. Another reporter asking for a comment. "No comment," Eunice cut off and disconnected the phone. Outside the window, the lights of Portland at night flashed. Somewhere out there, in that city, her ex-husband was drowning his sorrows in whiskey, and his mistress was planning an escape. But that wasn't her story anymore. Eunice had company to save, and she knew she could do it. After all, she had always been stronger than she appeared to those around her, even if she had to become a bit of a monster to do it. On a rainy October morning, Daisy took one last look around her apartment. Empty walls, bare windows with no curtains, an orphan duffel bag by the door. Everything else had to be sold. She sold the BMW first, at a considerable discount as long as it was quicker. Then it was the turn of designer handbags, shoes, jewelry. A pearl necklace, Tate's birthday present, went for a third of the price. "The proceeds will be enough for half the fine," she told the tax collector, laying out a wad of bills. "I'll pay the rest in installments." The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from debt collectors. Daisy changed her number, but somehow they would find a new one. Eventually, she just stopped answering. Her parents lived in a small town in Idaho. Once upon a time, Daisy had run away from there, dreaming of the big life in Portland. Now she had to go back, beaten, disgraced, penniless. "I told you," her mother pursed her lips as she met her at the bus station. "Nothing good will come of this city life of yours." In the meantime, Tate was settling into a room at the roadside motel. Shabby walls, a rickety bed, a perpetually humming refrigerator. The only possessions were a guitar and a couple of suits. "Hey, Steve," he yelled into the phone to an old buddy. "Let's get a band together. I've got a bunch of new songs." "Sorry, man," he replied after a pause. "It's not a good time right now. You know, reputation. That word followed him everywhere. The owner of the bar where he'd tried to get a job as a musician had said bluntly, "It's nothing personal, buddy, but you're toxic now. The customers won't understand." The money was disappearing fast. Tate scraped by on odd jobs, unloading trucks, filling in for bartenders at dubious eateries. In the evenings, he drank cheap whiskey and wrote songs that no one wanted to hear. On one such night, particularly drunk and lonely, he dialed Eunice's number. "Baby," his voice trailed off, "I'm such an idiot. I ruined everything, but I really loved you." "Tate," her voice sounded tired. "Stop it. No, listen. I'll write a song about us, about everything that happened." "Goodbye," she disconnected. The next 3 calls went blank. On the 4th, a mechanical voice said the number had been blocked. Daisy was trying to start a new life in Idaho. She got a job as a bookkeeper at the local supermarket, which was the best she could do with her reputation. She lived in her old room, listened to her mother's lectures, avoided meeting her former classmates. At night, she dreamed of Portland, the lights of the big city, expensive restaurants, the admiring glances of men. She woke up in tears, choking with longing for her old life. One day she tried to call Tate. The phone was disconnected for non-payment. The local paper ran a story about Portland Brew, a coffee chain that was expanding, opening new locations. The photos showed Eunice smiling as she cut the ribbon at the entrance to the new coffee shop. Daisy crumpled up the newspaper and threw it away. Her dreams of a rich life had been shattered, and her former boss was thriving as if the scandal had never happened. Tate continued his downward spiral. After another drunken brawl, he was evicted from the motel. He moved into a hostel, where he shared a room with 3 similar losers. Every night he sat with his guitar at the subway entrance, trying to earn money for food and booze. Sometimes someone would drop some change. More often they just walked by. "Hey, that's the one," came the whispers. "The one who stole his wife." One evening he saw Eunice walking out of an expensive restaurant with a man on her arm. Elegant, confident, unattainable. Tate jerked toward her, but stopped. His clothes were wrinkled, unshaven, smelling of cheap alcohol. He had no right to even speak to her. That night he drank himself into oblivion and wrote a song about the woman who had made his life a living hell. In the morning he reread the lyrics and tore them to shreds. Daisy received a postcard from a former colleague. Can you imagine? Your desk is now occupied by that upstart Sarah, and Eunice looks as if she's gotten younger since the divorce. She stared at the blurry Portland postmark for a long time. Then she pulled out the last bottle of wine she'd bought in her former life. To new beginnings, she said to her reflection in the window. But they both knew there would be no new beginning. There is only the gray reality of a small town, the judgmental stares of neighbors and the ghosts of past mistakes. And somewhere in Portland, Eunice was blocking the next number Tate tried to call and continuing to build her empire, without traitors around. Eunice sat in a conference room reviewing personnel files. A stack of folders lined the desk, the results of an internal investigation. So, she raised her eyes to the head of security. How many people did you know? 12. Mike Donovan unfolded the list. The bookkeeper, the receptionist at the 2 coffee shops, the receptionist. All saw it, all kept quiet. Fire. Eunice put a sprawling signature on the order. All of them. The next week passed in interviews. Eunice personally vetted each candidate, asking for references, examining backgrounds. No more random people, no more compromises. I need a new team, she explained to the board. People for whom loyalty is not an empty word. The business needed a refresh. Eunice ordered a redesign of all the coffee shops, revamped the menu, and hired a well-known barista from Seattle to train the staff. The 6th location will open in a month. She contemplated the design of the new cafe in the business center, fully automated with an electronic ordering system. In the mornings, she started running in the park by the river, 5 kilometers every day in all kinds of weather. The physical activity helped clear her head, chase away the remnants of bitterness and resentment. You've changed, old friend Sarah remarked over lunch. You've lost weight, gotten younger. Has the divorce been good for you? The freedom has gone good, Eunice smiled. She was really changing. She got a new haircut, updated her closet, signed up for yoga. It was like shedding old skin, becoming a different person. You know, Sarah lowered her voice conspiratorially. I have this guy I know. Successful lawyer, divorced, no kids. No, Eunice shook her head. I'm not ready. Her friends persisted in trying to arrange her personal life. They invited her to dinners, introduced her to promising men, hinted at loneliness. Honey, you need to move on, Sarah exhorted. You can't live in the past forever. But Eunice didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, she enjoyed independence, the ability to make decisions without looking to others. Business was booming. The new team was working like clockwork. Revenue was growing. Customers were coming back. The scandal was slowly being forgotten, becoming an urban legend. Eunice often stayed late at the office in the evenings. Not because of work, she just loved that time, when the city was quiet and the lights were on in the windows. I made it, she told her reflection. I overcame everything. In her desk drawer lay a folder of divorce papers. She hadn't opened it since that day, but she couldn't throw it away. Some lessons to remember. Running through the park one morning, she saw a couple, young, in love, laughing. Her heart stabbed for a second, a memory of her own youth, of her first days with Tate. But the pain passed quickly. She knew now happiness wasn't about relationships, it was about fulfillment, in the ability to build her world and protect it. Maybe someday, Eunice thought, watching the sunset from the terrace of the new coffee shop. But not now. Now is the time to take care of myself. She pulled out a notepad and began jotting down plans for the next year. A 7th coffee shop, entering the Seattle market. A new line of organic coffee. Life went on. And in this new life, she was stronger, wiser, and freer than ever. And everything else could wait.